motives. And if you remember, we've been talking about the natural resource seeking FDI. We haven't talked much about that table yet, but if you remember, we talked about those different forms: market seeking motives or market seeking FDI, resource seeking FDI, asset seeking FDI, and efficiency seeking FDI. And this is here a different table that actually picks up on those 4 different motives and types of FDI and tries to link them to the different determinants, namely the factors that influence the location decision of the firms. Yeah. So what are the most important factors basically that matter, or the determinants that matter for international companies if they are going for natural resource seeking FDI? Or if they are going for market seeking FDI, what is the most important determinants? We already spoke, if you remember, about the OLI framework, if I go back, and how this is very important to consider that these 3 preconditions usually have to be met for companies to engage in the international business. Yeah, and for the location, yeah, of course, ownership advantage, internalization advantage have to do with the fact whether they do it or not, whether they do it themselves or ask someone else to do it, outsourcing. And the location advantage has to do with, shall they do it in this particular location or not? Yeah? And while deciding about the location choice, there are those very important variables that play a role that partly, as you can see here, when we go through those factors, overlap strongly between the different motives, but also partly differ. And where we have big differences are usually the highest priority factors. So look at the factors here in a way that the most important factors usually come at the very beginning. So if we think natural resource seeking FDI, like as we've mentioned last time, an example would be international companies that are engaged in extracting natural resources. So they are going after a specific natural resource like oil, like gas, who is specifically which is specifically located in one certain location. So they are not only going to a specific country, but actually they have to be going to a specific spot, a specific location in that specific country where actually that natural resource is located. Yeah. So of course, the most important factor that plays a role here is, of course, the availability of that natural resource. So if they are going for extracting oil, oil has to be there in this particular location. Or if they're going to extract gas, it has to be in this particular location. Otherwise, if this is not met, it's as if you want a necessary condition. If it's not there, everything else wouldn't matter because still they can do what they want to do. So if you want, this natural resource seeking FDI is actually the most location restricted, or in other words, location bound kind of FDI, because they don't have too many options. They are going where the natural resource is available, and they are already bound by, depending on how you want to say, by geography, by nature, that they are not free completely in their choice as compared to other types of FDI, where there is definitely much more freedom and choice between different countries, but also within different countries. In this particular city of the country, or different country altogether. So there is much more flexibility in the other ones. So this is actually a very important thing: the availability of the resource, of course, the cost and the quality of the resource. Yeah, I mean, how much would it cost to extract this kind of resource there? What is the quality of it? So that plays a role. So it's all about the availability and the cost and quality and so on of the that kind of natural resource. But of course, other things like if they're gonna process that natural resource in that particular location, is it possible to do? Yeah. Infrastructure development, if they're gonna extract that resource and then they need to transfer it somewhere else where it's gonna be processed, or they have to they're going to export it to another country or the home country or whatever they're going to do with it. So is the infrastructure sufficiently developed there that would allow this to happen? The roads, the energy supply on site. Of course, they need secured energy supply in order to do that kind of business. So all of this plays a role. And as you can see here, this is a typical example. Infrastructure is important for all types of FDI. I mean, if you go down, you would find infrastructure everywhere here. And like here, infrastructure. It's very important for any kind of, for any investment, actually, even for domestic investors, not just for foreign direct investors, but any investor needs a proper infrastructure. So as I told you, there are common factors, but maybe their order is different, and the different ones here have different focus and different priority. Availability of joint venture partners, because often natural resource FDI activities need to, many countries require for such kind of activity to have a collaboration, a partnership with local companies. So that would be the joint venture that they seek, a joint partnership with the local authorities. Sometimes it's the government of the local country, or another private company, because many countries don't want their natural resource to be just in the hands of foreign companies. So they require for extraction by foreign companies to happen that they have some sort of partnership. And of course, they hope also to gain knowledge and improve their own skills and so on by that. But this kind of impact we're going to discuss later on today anyway. Okay, so this is the natural resource seeking FDI. The market seeking FDI, of course, the most important thing is what? We talked about that last time. What is the most important factor for market seeking FDI?
Being able to gain the new market access.
Exactly. So the market. So they are mainly behind the market. They mainly want to reach a certain market. Yeah? So what is very important is, of course, the market size. If it's a they want to, they enter the market so that they can sell their product that they will not import, but they're going to produce it there and also sell it there. So they want to reach the market in the destination country. So of course the market needs to be significant. If it's a small country that has just maybe a market of 500,000 or something, they wouldn't bother to just go and produce there and do everything there, while they could actually cover other much bigger countries. Yeah. So the size of the market is important. And as you remember from last time, we talked about how it's not only the size of the local country, but also regional markets. Right? So remember last time we talked about how many regions are actually integrated with each other. So if a Korean company, for example, produces somewhere in the European Union, but then they know they are not only reaching the country where they are producing, but because there are free customs and because products without any tariffs or quotas can change countries in the EU, they can actually reach the whole European market. Yeah? So they wouldn't look just at if they are, let's say, producing in the Czech Republic, or if they're producing in Poland, or if they are producing in Greece or in Spain, whatever, they won't just look at the local market, but they would look at the whole regional market. And in fact, it wouldn't matter for them whether this country specifically has the highest, the biggest market chances, because they see the market as the bigger picture. So for the company, if you want, it is like it's just a location within a big country. They see the whole integrated region as one big country, and as if they're just choosing one location within that country, because the whole integrated market from a company's perspective is as if it's just one country. It's just a very big one. Like if they're going to the United States, and then they would look at the whole United States as one country and still decide about which location in the country for what makes more sense for them. Of course, this needs certain prerequisites. Of course, we're talking about products here mainly that you can transport easily between regions and that don't get spoiled. I mean, if we're talking about McDonald's choice where to have a branch, this is different, huh? Because restaurants and that kind of business is very local. It's a product that gets spoiled. You don't transport it within the country. Maybe the bread buns or something, but not the service itself that you provide. So that's different. But if they're looking to produce in a certain factory something that they want to market in the whole market, they see the whole big market as a whole. And they don't only see the domestic and the regional market as they are, as we've mentioned last time, but what is very important is their growth prospects as well. So they don't only look at the actual market size, but they also look at the market potential. Is it a market that is growing, expanding? Maybe the regional market is growing because they know that this particular country is entering a free trade agreement soon, or already entered one that is going to start in the next being implemented in the next years. For example, Africa now with a regional integration that is happening, and in not yet is everything well connected, but the prospect is that the countries are going to be more connected, that if you produce in one country, you can achieve more other countries much easier than it used to be before. Yeah. So those kind of prospects, yeah, also matter very much for the company. So you see, market seeking FDI has everything around the market, its size, its growth perspective, the domestic and the regional one as number one criteria for them. But of course, this is not the whole story. Of course, also the cost of labor plays a role. But you can see here for efficiency seeking FDI, everything around labor and production cost and the cost efficiency is the number one. So that's the main difference between the market seeking and the efficiency seeking FDI. Of course, they overlap, yes, but the market seeking ones has mainly market criteria as the first criteria, while as the efficiency seeking FDI has mainly where can they produce the most efficiently. So what about production cost in comparison? What about labor force in comparison, skilled professional labor works, competitiveness, and so on. So all those factors play a role here as well. But it's just the order, the priority that makes a difference. So therefore, you can see here, cost of labor comes as well. Infrastructure comes everywhere. Institutional competence, and we're going to talk in a minute about what does that actually mean, institutional competence, which is repetitively also mentioned here. Agglomeration economies, that's a term that we've introduced before in this lecture. Do you remember what this was about? When we were talking about globalization, what is agglomeration? Agglomeration economies. Do you remember? Does this slide seem familiar to anyone? So we had this before. I just have it here again for a recap as a reminder. But we talked before about agglomeration effects in the context of globalization when we mentioned that usually companies, businesses, people, industries tend to locate in one location, a cluster in locations. For example, in a city, in an industrial structure, as cluster, service cluster. And we talked about why this happens. Remember the efficiency increasing arguments. So if you remember when I asked you, why is it that you often have a clustering business, like many companies or sellers that are selling the same thing, but are just concentrating in one street? Why would they do it? Like a street full of furniture, or a street full of lighting, or a street full of even fruit and vegetables, market. Why? Because that's more efficient. Why is it more efficient? Do you remember? Dominic?
Maybe they all have also like the same supplier, so the
Okay.
transport costs are like lower.
Yeah, so that's one reason. Maybe they share the same supplier. So it's more efficient that the supplier comes and just delivers to all of them together at the same time. So they basically share the supplier cost. The supplier can charge them less because the supplier company is not just delivering for one location or one seller, but actually for several ones in one location. Other arguments, Fidalia?
If I'm not mistaken, I think it's also easier for companies to hire like a high amount of people in the same area.
Yeah, right. Right. So if we take a bigger picture, that's not necessarily clustering in one street, but clustering in one city. So if you have a city where you have lots of IT companies, so there is a high chance that many people that are specialized in that field, that they are going to be living there because they have so many working opportunities there. There's also a high chance that you can recruit people easier because someone maybe leaves one company and joins another company. So they can share a pool of labor force that is very specialized, highly skilled, even takes knowledge from one company to the other, which they might be also interested in. Yeah, so all of this can play a role. So that's often why we would find certain cities or neighborhoods or even countries having a high concentration of the one specialization, because there's so much specialized knowledge concentrating there, and this in itself has lots of efficiency gains. And we're going to talk in more detail what kind of efficiency gains are there. So for example, one advantage here are the so-called spillover effects, that you have basically knowledge in one firm, in one location, and this knowledge basically has positive externalities, spills over to other companies. And this can happen through different channels. One of them is what you just mentioned, labor turnout effect. So if you have people working for one company and then they go and work for another company that's doing something related to that, or maybe for the competition. So this means they take knowledge with them and the knowledge spreads in the economy. We have to differentiate between two different things here. For the economy as a whole, this is positive. Because the knowledge is spreading more in the economy, and this is more efficient because other companies don't need to start things from scratch, but basically can build on the knowledge of others. So from a macroeconomic, from an economics perspective, that's good. From the company's perspective, they of course try to limit as much as possible that kind of effect. Now, if you're a company and you have specialized labor force that you also invested a lot in, and if that labor force has lots of specialized knowledge, would you want this labor force to join the competition? Would you?
Of course not.
Of course not. Exactly. So the more you appreciate those people and the more you think that the damage of them joining the competition, the more you probably will try to make their salary and their package so lucrative that they don't leave you. The more you would maybe try as much as possible to protect that kind of knowledge. And maybe if they go and tell you, well, we were approached by the competition, we're about to be recruited, something like that, maybe this is always a good opportunity to negotiate salary increase and so on. But of course, not for everyone that works in the company, but for people that are seen as very specialized labor force that would basically, if they leave, take so much of the knowledge of the firm with. I mean, I've heard that also some companies try to put a clause in the contracts that it's not possible to work for the competition after leaving, but this would be up to the labor law, basically, of the different countries to see whether such a clause is actually legal or not, because you cannot monopolize the people. So this would depend on different countries, whether this is possible actually to have or not. But we need here to differentiate from the perspective of the companies and the perspective of the whole economy. We're arguing here from a developmental perspective, from the perspective of the company. From the perspective of the economy. From an economic perspective, sharing knowledge is good. If knowledge is spread more in the economy, is good. It increases efficiency. It reduces the chance that you have any monopolistic power in the economy. So this is actually a good opportunity for knowledge to basically spread, and this is a spillover or a positive externality, because basically other companies that didn't invest in this particular knowledge can also benefit from it. So this would make them also more productive. So those spillover effects basically are beneficial from a developmental perspective because they increase the aggregate productivity of the economy. They increase the level of knowledge in the economy. They make the knowledge spread more, which is very good from an economic perspective. So this is the labor turnout effect. Labor changing companies, taking knowledge with them, spreading. And you can imagine that's part of what we said, the efficiency increase that happens in the agglomeration economies. Okay. Now, other effects through which this can happen are demonstration or imitation effects. What are these and what's the difference? Imitation effect is easy. Companies imitate each other. Even if they don't hire workers from each other, but they look at each other products, they try to imitate what the others are doing. Yeah. So agglomeration again means concentration of knowledge and of firms in those particular locations, and they're going to imitate each other, even in a very simple sense. I mean, if you imagine furniture stores that are clustered in a certain location, they can even visit each other's stores, even if they don't show that they are from the competition, and look for new ideas or look for how they are presenting their products. Oh, maybe this makes more sense to present it that way. That attracts the customer better. So let's imitate them. So copying from the others, looking what the others are doing and trying to imitate in a positive sense. Again, companies don't like that. But from an economic perspective, it's good. Companies don't like to be imitated. So they like to imitate the others, but nobody likes to be imitated, because if the others will benefit from this, you don't want your competitor to be stronger, right? But from an economic perspective, it's good, because if this makes more companies have more reason to improve, to innovate, to learn more how to deal with the competition. I remember when we were talking about agglomeration economies, we said, of course, this clustering of the companies in one location has a negative effect, namely for them, namely too much competition. So they have to see how they're still going to survive. For us as consumers and for the economy, this competition is good, because competition, we know from principles of economics, increases efficiencies. Competition makes companies, they can't lay back and say, oh, we're in a good position, we don't have to do anything anymore, but they're constantly on the work. How to improve, how to reduce costs, how to have better solutions, how to be more innovative, how to bring something new on the market, how to check the reviews of the consumers and improve. And this increases efficiency. This leads to more improvement, to more innovative solutions, better solutions, and so on in the economy. So this is the imitation effect. Now, there could also be a demonstration effect. Can you think of a setup where maybe a company even goes and teaches another company how to do things better? I mean, obviously, no company would ever think of teaching their competitors how to do things better. I mean, that doesn't make sense. Okay, so the competitors, they mainly learn through labor force turnout, through imitation, yes. So nobody will go and teach the competitor how to do things better. I mean, nobody from Samsung would ever visit LG and tell them, how you can do things better. You can do this and that. That's never going to happen anywhere in the world. But can you think of a setup where someone could basically be interested in teaching another company how to do things better? Johan?
Maybe in some kind of joint venture, where like one company maybe has a supplier which can produce a good, some kind of good more cheap, and but it doesn't really has like a big knowledge background, and then like people from the company show how it could produce it more efficiently.
Yeah, right. But you're actually mixing two things together. You can split that argument in two different ones. The joint venture is if two companies join forces and make a joint company out of them. So
Okay.
then they teach them. But what the other argument you talked about, the supplier, is very important argument. Yes, as a company, you would like your supplier to be of good quality, right? You would like your supplier to be consistent in quality. You would like your supplier to be on time and not late. You would like your supplier not to have excuses that would lead to late delivery, that would lead you to have problems in your production. You would like your supplier to know how to use the best material and to know the better sources of material. You would like your supplier basically to know exactly what you want from them and to help you in having the best final product that you have, right? So this could be a demonstration effect. So if many big companies basically do workshops for their suppliers to improve their qualities, they go and visit their suppliers and talk to them and maybe tell them where there's a problem, and maybe there was a problem in this kind of quality of this particular thing, and maybe you should improve this. So here there is even a demonstration effect, because it's in their own best interest to have a better supplier. Same if you think of a customer. What if you are a company basically that does microchips? So if you're producing microchips, what's your market? Nico, would you like to build on that argument, or you have
I don't
something
know.
else?
I thought of a similar way. I thought about, for example, a company that outsources like specific works. For example, a company that needs like a marketing campaign or something, and another company works for them. So they hire this marketing company in order to, yeah, establish a marketing campaign for them.
Right, and then they would also be interested in communicating with them, demonstrating maybe how to do things better, because it's a mutual interest to have better work. Okay, can you think from the customer perspective? So here, this is more a step back. So, okay, this is marketing is more a service, okay, but we talked also about supplier. Can you think also of customer perspective, Dominic?
Yeah, when I would like outsource some things that are not like as specialized in that, like logistics or invoicing, something like that, I could outsource it, and then I'm only like specialized in, yeah, at my materials or my products, and I can only like focus on that.
Okay, so how does it connect now to our demonstration effect?
I work for like a fourth party logistics provider who is yeah, like also on the market for big players like Sun Chemical, which is like producing all over the world, and
Yeah.
they're outsourcing their all project management and the transport to us. So we are like specialized in that, and they can focus and put all their money in their production sites and, yeah, to produce.
Okay, so they would basically be interested in communicating to their outsource outsourcer, the company they outsource to, in telling them what they exactly need and how to do things tailored to their own interest and so on?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, yeah, so here there could be a demonstration effect. If you think in terms of a customer, if you are, again, my example, a microchip company, for example, who's your customer? Maybe your customer is an end user. So you would like to market your product to the end user, but maybe you're producing microchips that are going to be included in different products, in the car industry, in the mobile industry, in whatever nowadays we have that include microchips, right? So maybe you're also interested in demonstration effects. You're interested in going to you are basically an intermediate product that others use. So you would be interested in going to the next one in the chain. So remember when we said a product can have different phases? So you're interested in going to the one next and basically demonstrating to them, well, if you do it that way, this increases the efficiency of your product. If you use that microchip and not the other one, this is an improved technology because it does this and this and that. So they are interested in also, if you want, giving part of the knowledge they have in a way that's not to their negative disadvantage, but actually to their advantage, because when they do this, they expand their market. Maybe they enter new industries. Maybe this way they can convince their customers, which are companies as well, to use their products rather than the products of their own competition that have other microchips, because they are better, they are doing it more efficiently, they are more tailored to their own needs, whatever it is. So you can see here that when there is cooperation more on the vertical side, suppliers down from your own, what you're doing, your supplier is one step back, your customer is one step up, to reaching the end consumer. There is more cooperation here, not just what we often think of copying the competition and competing over the labor force. This what seems more like I can do what they do and that kind. This is happening more between companies that do exactly the same thing. But when it comes to nowadays, our supply, our production process, as we talked last time, is so vertically integrated within countries, but also across the world. So there is more cooperation now, and there is more room also for demonstration effects and learning effects between these vertical components of the vertical line. And this is exactly here, those demonstration effects that I was talking to you about, backward and forward. This is the so-called backward and forward linkages. And these are very important terms that we will bring up again when we talk about the impact of FDI. Probably you read about them also in your reading, and maybe not everything was very well clear, but this should be after our discussion here. So a backward linkage is basically a linkage to the back of what you're doing, more supplier. And a forward linkage is a linkage one step closer to the customer. So a linkage to your own customer as a company, which doesn't have to be an end consumer. It can be just another company that is your customer, like the example I gave you. So let me give you here an example. I know that we haven't finished the table a few slides back. I'm going to go back to it, but I wanted to basically, if I tell you again our context, I wanted to make sure that you understand what here the agglomeration economies are, and we're just digging deeper into them, and then we'll go back and finish off the table again. So agglomeration economies, we're talking about the source of those efficiency increase, possible channels, and one of them is the so-called backward and forward linkages. So let's try to explain what the backward and forward linkages are. If you summarize, or if you generalize them, backward and forward linkages are just vertical linkages. The vertical line. So backward linkages are basically linkages to your own supplier. Like the example that we just did, what Johan started, and then we talked about it. If you talk to your own supplier and tell them what you need better, what you want better, how to improve, So companies are interested in having those backward linkages because they can improve their own quality. This argument is going to be so important argument when we think about how can FDI also affect the development of developing countries. Can you think why? Why we're already at it? So why are those backward linkages important when we think about how foreign direct investment can affect the development of the recipient developing country? Any idea? Foreign company, forget about what's on the slides afterwards. This will not help you, the example. That's something else. A foreign company, let's say Samsung, okay, goes and produces in a different market. Okay, like I told you, there is a Samsung factory in Egypt. What is a backward linkage here? What would be a backward linkage? The backward is from the perspective of the company. Okay, from the company perspective. Any link to their own supplier is a backward linkage. So the question would be, are all their suppliers abroad, outside of Egypt, or do they have suppliers within Egypt? If we want to check how the company can have an impact on the Egyptian economy, there are so many channels through which there can be an impact, and we will discuss all of them today. But what possibility is, do they maybe have linkages to suppliers? For example, do they buy some of their raw materials in Egypt? If this is the case, then they definitely have backward linkages to local suppliers. So maybe they're going to have a workshop for them. How can you improve your knowledge? How can you improve your product? How can you produce a punctual in the right time and don't be delayed? How can you be competitive? Maybe they will even offer a training to their own suppliers because this is beneficial to them. If they train them just in one workshop and this increases the quality of their supply, they benefit from it because maybe it's cheaper for them still to do this than to get all the supply needs that they have from abroad. So those backward linkages, as one example of vertical linkages, are seen as one of the very important impacts of foreign companies in the countries where they are producing. Of course, not every company does vertical linkages. Maybe they just go and bring all the raw materials and everything they need and their supplies from abroad, and they don't interact at all with the local market. Okay, then we say they are not really vertically integrated in the market. But the more vertically integrated they are, the more linkages they have with the local economy, the more their knowledge can spread in the whole economy. And that spread of knowledge is a big value added for developing countries. If foreign companies are coming and they don't just bring the product they are bringing, and they don't just provide labor employment options and other aspects that we're going to talk about. I don't want to have the whole discussion now on the impact, but this particular thing, if they become integrated in the market and they buy, for example, local supplies, and they talk to their suppliers and try to improve their quality and so on, so you can see that this can have more multiplier effects on the local economy, not just the production that they are doing. Because those suppliers, when they get better, they will not get better only to supply the Samsung factory, but they will get better in general. which can have an impact on the economy, maybe later on supply also other companies in a better quality and so on. So there is an increased value added and increased productivity, aggregate productivity in the economy. So this argument we're gonna go back to. That's why we're setting important or clarifying very important terms now that we're going to need also in our discussion on the impact of FDI. Forward linkages. What are forward linkages? The opposite. So these are linkages basically towards consumers. And the consumers here, from the company perspective, they can also be other companies. As I told you, as a microchip company, you could be producing something directly for the end consumer, but you could, and that's very realistic, be producing just microchips for other companies that they're going to integrate in their own products. So these kind of linkages are so-called forward linkages. Any linkages to the one that basically is taking your own product and doing something further with it. Yeah. So as an example here, very primitive example from this, having a steel mill. Yeah? So to perform the economic activity of a steel mill, definitely they need the steel. They need the inputs from the coal mining in order to do their own job. This would be the backward linkage to produce the steel. And then forward linkages would be that when the steel mill sells it, whatever it produced already, it needs to develop links with the metal fabrication industry, the construction companies, the wholesalers, the retailers of steels, and so on, because all of these are basically their own customers. So these linkages are the forward linkages. So linkages to the back, to the supplier, linkages forward to the consumer. Those linkages, they are not just in the context of FDI. They are in the context of any company in general, even if they don't do FDI, if they just are domestically. But we are going to use those linkages in the FDI context in two things. One thing is asking ourselves again, and now I will go, let me go back here, agglomeration economies. We were thinking about why would a company choose a certain location? And one of it would be maybe because the market has these kind of agglomeration economies, because they have their own suppliers in that market, they have their own customers in that market, they can be connected to that market. That's one reason why to choose a certain location. The other thing, so if you're going, let's say, to China in order to produce cars there and reach the big Chinese market, that's market taking. But you need also to ask yourself, okay, the market is big, yes, it's growing, yes. The cost of labor is not expensive, yes. Infrastructure is quite good, okay. Now we need to think institutional competence. We're going to get back to that, but also you need to think of your agglomeration economies there. So you need suppliers there for your production. You need lots of raw materials, you need lots of intermediate goods. Where are you going to get them? Are you going to get them from the Chinese market, or are you going to get them from abroad, and how much it would cost and everything? So these are important aspects that you need to consider. From the Chinese perspective, they will, of course, try as much as possible to let you, as a car company, do as much as possible in China. Get the raw materials from there, get the intermediate goods from there, have as much as possible linkages to the local economy, because usually this increases their benefit from this activity of the foreign company. But even the company might be interested in that, because this means they can guarantee more their supply chain, they can guarantee more cheap supplies, accessible supplies, available supplies, and so on. So they would be interested in also communicating with their suppliers and make sure that they have a proper, a good quality, that they are competitive, producing on time, and all this. Or if you want, kind of transfer of knowledge that happens from the foreign companies in the local markets. The more they get connected and integrated in the local market, the more their knowledge spills over, spreads in that economy. And from an economic perspective, from a developmental perspective, this is great for developing countries. So this makes them learn more about more competitive techniques, about more knowledge. They become more advanced in their technologies and so on. Of course, for this to happen, we need certain conditions and prerequisites, and all of this we're going to discuss in more detail. But just the idea of what are spillovers, what does it mean agglomeration economies, I need you to understand that so that when we refer to it later, that it's already clear to you. So do you have questions about that concept here before we move on? Or comments? Okay, doesn't seem to be the case. So another important aspect that we need to discuss is about the institutional competence. So what does that mean? Again, here, they are saying also institutions. So why would it matter for a company what kind of institutions there are in a country when they choose their location? Kuber?
One thing is that they need to have a stable regulation. For example, if there is like no regulation regarding someone barging in and demanding more money or stealing your stuff, then the company cannot sustain itself. Or maybe the tax regulation or something, if it is not like, if it varies every time a government change, or if there's something like that might make the company very like in dangerous situation or unprofitable.
Okay. Other examples you can think of about the institutional competence, institutional framework? So what are institutions of a country? What does it mean? So there is usually a difference between formal institutions, informal institutions. The formal institutions are basically whatever laws and regulations that you have in the country that rule the country. The rules of the game is an often used word for institutions, how the country is managed somehow. What is allowed, what is not allowed, what does the constitution allow, what does the different kinds of laws in the country allow, but also not allow or prohibit. And how strong is the institution? Is it just cheap talk written in laws and texts and regulations, or is it in fact implemented? Is it enforced? Is a violation of law something that the police, the judiciary would go against, or is it something that they just turn a blind eye on and it's not really implemented? So that's the formal institutions in a country. And then you can imagine that those kind of institutions can be economic, and of course they are very important for investors, but also political institutions, legal institutions are very important. So what are political institutions, for example, that are very important? So economic, we had examples mentioned now. What is the tax law in the country, or what is allowed, what is not allowed? What are maybe other economic institutions that are important for firms? For you as a company, what would be the most important economic institution or the most important economic law that you need to make sure that is there in any country before you invest in? Alexandra?
Maybe that the national bank is independent, for example, and also the tax regulator on that country, the way it works, that it's also independent?
Well, the tax regulator is never independent because you mean the one that sets the tax is the government, so it's never independent.
Okay, yeah, but that like the institution itself, it's strong, you know, that it's not like very much influenced if they were to have a bad government at that time.
Okay, and the central bank independence affect the way they set the interest rates. Okay, but is this really the most important economic institution? They are important, of course, because it affects the argument here of the macroeconomic policies, the macroeconomic stability. How is the interest rate set in the country? Exchange rate? Is it fixed? Is it fluctuating? Is it stable? So those macroeconomic policies are very important. But even before this, what is a very important economic institution in a country that investors think of? And if it's not given, they will never think to invest in a country. What would be your worst nightmare that you could think of as an investor? Johan?
Maybe not having strong property rights, like you invest somewhere and the next day, like you lose your investment because someone else just takes it. I actually do not know the name of the institution, but like you need a strong government monopoly on like violence or law. Yeah.
Okay, so it's property right is an institution. That's the thing. Institutions are not necessarily an authority or a body. Institutions in the social science context is actually the set of rules and regulations that create incentives for people to act in a certain way. This is the well-established definition in social science, which was affected by the famous work of Douglas North, a very important institutional economist. So there is so already property rights itself is an institution. Of course, there is a body that takes care that property rights is implemented. Well, the most important thing is you have rule of law in the country, and you have a police system and a judiciary system that is strong. And in case there is violation of property rights, that they will go against it, and basically then investors and companies are protected. Even individuals are protected. Your own property, as if you own a house or a car or whatever you own, is actually yours, and nobody can confiscate it or take it from you. This is already an institution because it's part of the economic law in the country that this is protected, and it's also enforced. So that's why, remember, I'm telling you the enforcement is so important, because if many countries have many, and this is the difference between weak and strong institutions, many countries have cheap talk institutions somehow. And so it's written somewhere in the constitution and probably in economic laws, property rights are protected. But the question is it in reality protected? So again, a difference between de jure and de facto. Remember what we talked about? De jure, not with globalization context in general. De jure it's by the law, it's written somewhere, yes. But is it de facto actually implemented? Or is it just cheap talk? And this is a difference in the quality of institutions between country, and is actually the most or maybe the ultimate importance in development. Because you can say whatever you want to say about, we want to attract investors, we want to attract foreign capital, we want to grow, we want job opportunities. But nobody will ever invest in a country when they know that tomorrow morning there is a high probability that their investments are just going to be hijacked and either confiscated by the government or by someone else who will just say, come and say, now that's mine. Now go to the law, to the court, and show me how you can get it back. But if you feel secured as a company, basically as an investor, that this cannot happen to you, this is very important. So in general, rule of law is what governs. This is the very important institution, and rule of law is actually an economic, legal, political institution. It's everything. It's the ultimate institution, because if you have property rights written somewhere, but there is no rule of law, then you can forget about it. It's never going to be enforced. So who's governing? Is it the law, or is it the politicians that can do whatever and nobody questions them? That's very important. So, or the government can do whatever and is not held accountable for whatever they are doing. So rule of law is a very important institution. If we think specifically economic institutions, property rights are very important, but of course also for companies, very important, the tax regulations of the country, the corporate law of the country, corporate governance of the country, all of this, very important. But first of all, they need to know that they are secured in their investments. Can you think of any political institutions that are important as well for investors? Johan?
Maybe also like I don't know if it counts as in political, but the education system, which is like made by the like politics in terms of like
Okay.
yeah.
But that's not a political institution per se. That's more of a maybe socioeconomic institution
okay,
in the country. So they cannot the quality of the education system, whether it's driven by certain ideology or not, what kind of educational backgrounds, yes, but what is more straightforwardly political, Fidelia?
I'm not sure if this is part of the institution, but political stability, would that be part of
Yes,
it?
yeah, you did the institutions course, you should know. And others here as well, yes. Political stability in the country. This is a very important political institution in the country. If the country is politically unstable, if there's a war going on, conflicts, the transition of power from one ruler to the other is not done in a non-violent way, and so on. This is so unstable. Political instability deters investors. Who would like to go and invest in a country where there is war, where there is civil war, for example, or a lot of political violence going on, where there is a political dispute over who's ruling the country? So all of this political instability is also deterring investors. I mean, there can be good investment opportunities, but there is a big risk that basically everything will be gone. So nobody would like to invest in such kind of setup. And also when there is a political instability, there is automatically an economic instability. Because who's setting the economic laws and regulations? Who's setting the tax system? Who's protecting the property rights? Who's having important infrastructure, for example? Under political instability and war and everything, probably infrastructure will be gone. So this is also a big killer for any as an institutional requirement, an investment requirement. So other political institutions you can think of? Anusha?
Maybe the access to market, which kind of market there is available according
Okay,
to
this
the
is more
political
economic.
system. Like if it's a democracy state, then they have a free market access, and in case of communist, then it's more a closed one.
Okay, but I think you're confusing a few things together. We should differentiate between the market, the economic liberalism, and the political one, or the economically suppressed market and the political ones. Like there is a possibility for countries to have free market economy, but still not being democratically run.
Yes.
And there are some countries like that. But if you say open and free market that are competitive and where they are against monopoly powers and where you have antitrust laws that are against monopolies, yes, very important economic institution. And then if you're talking political institution, do we have a democracy or an autocracy? That's a political institution. There can be, of course, a big overlap. I mean, often democracies are more liberal economically and so on, but it's not automatic. And there are countries that are not democratic and still have open competitive markets.
Yes, like you mean China, right?
Yes. I mean, it's not 100% open competitive, but likely. But also Singapore, for example.
Okay.
It's not a democracy, but still very economically liberal. So there are some examples for that. Okay. So these are all under the context, basically, of the institutional framework. Whether the country, basically, let me show you also a slide on that, and then I go back to the table again. The investment climate in the country, if you want. So for investors to come, you need a proper investment climate that attracts investors. And what is a proper investment climate? It has to do with the institutions of the country, the institutional framework or setting that you have for investments. So it's basically the investment climate is defined by a wide range of factors that determine whether investment happens or not, whether investors are attracted for investment or not. And by the way, this is for domestic and foreign investors. So under instability and under lack of rule of law and under lack of property rights, it's not only that FDI wouldn't come and foreign investors will not come, but even the local ones will rather invest their money somewhere else. So these factors are important for both domestic and foreign investors. And of course, even more for foreign investors, because a foreign investor can decide where to invest in the whole world. So they are even more picky in where to invest. So the institutional framework has some economic, some political, some legal factors that play a role. And of course, they are very interrelated. I remember when we mentioned that all economic factors that are related to development, they are interconnected. They are not isolated from each other. So, of course, it's very important to have soundness of macroeconomic policies. And this has to do with what Alexandra mentioned before about the interest rate, also the exchange rate, the role of the central bank, the economic stability in the currencies, stability, inflation is not too high. All of this is important for the macroeconomic policies of the country. And then the strength of the economic and the political institutions. And we already talked about so many examples here today. Property rights, tax laws, and political economic stability, political stability or not, democracy or autocracy. Also, as an economic institution, do you have open free markets and competition? Is competition protected? Do you have laws and authorities against monopolies or not, against cartels or not? All of these are very important institutions. That the legal and the regulatory framework is functioning and working properly. As I told you, it's not just the fact that it's not enough to have things just written somewhere in a law that is dusted and nobody touches, basically, but it's important to have things also being enforced and implemented, that if there is a dispute, if an investor has a problem, that there is a legal body that they can go to that listens to them, that is unbiased, and not just on the side of the government or the locals, and can basically take care of their issues. The infrastructure that was also repetitively mentioned in the table is also part of the investment climate. I mean, no investor would like to go where there is not a proper infrastructure. It's such a necessary requirement. And of course, depending on what kind of business activity you have, you need different standards or maybe different facets of infrastructure. So are you having an investment that needs lots of energy supply and also stable energy supply? Are you maybe having an investment that is so in ICT, for example, information and communication technology, that is so internet based? So you need a proper internet, a speedy internet, a stable internet, and so on. Of course, very basic, you need roads. You need transportation options. Are you whatever you're going to produce, how is it going to be transported? Is it going to be exported to another country? So you need ports to do this, maybe airports as well. Is it going to be transported within the country? So using what? Transportation company, shipping company? Is it through the rail system? How is the railway working? What is the quality, the punctuality, the effectiveness of the system? Do you have proper energy supply? Do you have proper supply of water, electricity, gas? All of this is part of the infrastructure, and of course very much the roads. Whatever you're going to have your business, for example, what is the quality of the roads? How well is it connected with other parts, and so on. And other services that you need. Are we going to have a business where you need good quality of suppliers? Maybe you have a business where you need good quality of shipping company that are going to ship whatever you're producing. All the kind of business related services, internet, energy that you need, are they available? And not just the quantity of the availability, but also the quality of the availability, the predictability, stable prices, for example. Are energy prices somehow stable, or are they so fluctuating and under constant risks in the country, and so on? The investment policies of the country, whatever policies from the government. And here, of course, we have also, for example, how are the businesses taxed? How are they attracted? Are they having good services provided to them? How easy is it to open a business? The regulatory framework of opening a business, the efficiency of opening the business. There is actually a ranking, an indicator by the World Bank of how easy it is for a foreign company to open a business in a country. How many days it gets to open a business. In some countries, 1 day. It takes you 1 day to open a business, to open a company. And in other countries, it takes you 5 years to open a company. And literally, I'm not joking. So you can imagine what is more attractive and what is more deterring investors. And in some countries, it's 90 days, 50 days, 190 days. So they quantify it in days. How easy is it actually to open businesses? So all of these are part of the investment climate, and you can see there are so many factors that attract investors and so many factors that just deter investors and let them think, no, that's not the setup that you can have a profitable business in. Let's just go somewhere else. Even if there is a huge market, even if there is a proper labor force and a cost-effective way of producing, but then if you can't open the business, if your business cannot be secured, if you need all the time to be in risk that if you have a problem, that you don't have a proper judiciary system in the country that is unbiased and there's behind you, that there is rule of law in the country. All of these factors are very important. Otherwise, that the government is basically in support of foreign investment and wants to attract foreign investments and have this will to solve problems when they are, rather than basically to be always biased for just local companies. This is all very important to have the right setup and framework basically for foreign investors to act. So here you can basically see that the concept of good governance, what is the governance system in the country, is a very important concept that plays a role here. And if we generalize from the institutions we were speaking about, governance is a broad concept that basically includes political governance, economic governance, and corporate governance, which is very important for businesses and companies. So this overlaps very much with the institutions, the political institutions, economic institutions. So as political governance or also political institutions, it's about what is the type of the political system you have in the country. Is it a democracy, an autocracy, and for whatever what is in between? How we know that the world is not really fully black and white in that regard. What is the constitutional setup in the country? What is the relationship between the state and the society? All of these are very important. Is the rule of law? Is it that it's a country where you mainly have state-run companies that are always in big competition for private investments? So better not get into competition with the governments of the country. Economic governance or institutions has to do more with how the governmental institutions are basically regulating the economy. Are property rights secured? Contract rights. If you have a contract with your supplier, if you have a contract with your customer, you want to be sure that the contract is going to be enforced, so that if they basically violate that contract, you need to be sure that you can get your rights. This is super important, because if you cannot have a proper contract with your employees or with your suppliers or with your customers, it's a huge risk and uncertainty that you're having all the time that actually deters investors. So are contract the contracts, are they strong in the country? Are they being really enforced? What happens if someone violates the contract? If your supplier doesn't deliver on time, huge problem. So what happens? Is it just that you tell your supplier, well, next time I'm going to deal with another supplier, that kind of sanction? Or can you really have a term in your contract that says if they don't provide on time, they have to pay you basically a fine for not delivering on time? Okay, now what if they say, no, we're not paying the fine? Can you go to the police with that? Can you go to the court? And can you be relying on the fact that they're going to be unbiased and that they're going to enforce this clause that was in your contract? Or super important factors for investors. Competition law. Is there competition in the country? Are there monopolies? Are there institutions that are against monopolies? Antitrust law in the country? All is also very important. And then the corporate governance, which basically has to do with the national and the company laws that determine the practices of corporate conduct. So if you are a foreign company here, what is the laws of companies under which you're operating? What are there shareholders in your company? What would be the rights? What are the accounting standards that you have to adhere to in that country? How are you going to pay your taxes? Do you have certain laws and regulations regarding how you have to be transparent and you have to disclose to the government and to the shareholders? And all this setup of the company laws and the corporate laws are also very important for the companies when they go and invest in another country. And as I told you, ultimately, you need to have rule of law, because you can have all of this, but if the law doesn't matter in the country and is not really enforced, if all of this is just de jure written there somewhere, but nobody de facto implements it, then actually, who cares about it? I mean, we can have lots of cheap talk in any laws. If nobody implements that law, it's basically useless. So a strong institution always needs to be enforced. Otherwise, nobody cares about it. So all of this is whatever falls under here, I go back again, the idea of the institutional competence, the institutions that are very also important for choosing the location. Okay, we also talked about macroeconomic policies. It's also part actually of the institutional framework, but here they decide to have it extra because it depends whether you see institutions in a very broad sense or maybe just a very narrow sense. So it's good to have it even as an extra point here. Yeah, now efficiency seeking, we already talked about production costs, skilled labor force, again, infrastructure, institutions, macroeconomic policies. You see it's getting repeated again. Maybe what is extra important for efficiency seeking FDI is cluster specializations. Agglomerations that are very specialized. Remember, efficiency seeking, you're basically going to a specific location because it's more efficient to produce in this particular location. Maybe this country has industrial parks that are very specialized in doing exactly this particular thing. Or where you have very good supply network of suppliers and so on. So this can be very specific thing of producing, for example, microchips in a specific location. Or this is how you can think of how the Silicon Valley all over started in California, a location that is so specialized and has a specialized labor force being there, lots of companies, knowledge clustered there, lots of facilities infrastructure-wise from the government and so on, that makes it very efficiency seeking for many companies to basically go specifically to this particular location and have their business there. As a final one here, the strategic asset seeking. If you remember, I told you last time, I told you it's better when we talked about this one here. I told you it's actually better to split the second column into the resource seeking and the asset seeking one, because they are a little bit different. And this is basically what this table is doing. The natural resource seeking alone, and here the asset seeking, the strategic asset seeking one alone, which is basically about going for a FDI out of strategic reasons, because you're looking for certain assets of certain companies that are in a certain location. So availability of knowledge related assets such as certain technology, certain management expertise. For example, what about companies that basically go in strategically and merge with another company for a strategic reason? Happens sometimes in the car industry. That you have a collaboration between two big names that decide to join forces out of strategic reasons. So what was it? I think, was it the I'm not sure, is it the Citroën brand of cars, the French one that is in Korea labeled as Samsung cars, or was it, no, Renault, I think. Is it Renault? I think Renault cars are called Samsung cars here. It was a French car company, but now I'm a bit confused. Which one? Any of you familiar here with cars that are called Samsung cars in Korea? And which company they are in collaboration with? It must be, I think Renault it was, which is actually a French company, but apparently they run into Korea under Samsung name. So apparently there has been a collaboration at some point between this French car company and a big Korean name, not necessarily in the car industry, but that they joined forces strategically and made this kind of collaboration here. Renault is right. Okay, thank you. So I don't know the history of this kind of collaboration, but for me, someone that knows well about the Renault name that is in many other countries just under the Renault and has nothing to do with Samsung, but there seems to be a Korean thing that they basically join forces together out of strategic reason. Samsung has a good name already in Korea, has its network, has its suppliers, and maybe the name Renault was not big enough here in Korea. Maybe they wanted to join the infrastructure, the already existing customer base, something like that. So this would be a strategic collaboration that Renault doesn't have to establish itself from the beginning in Korea, but basically use already the existing Samsung infrastructure. But as I told you, I don't know exactly about this particular vacation. Do they produce together this cooperation? What exactly is going on? But this happens a lot in the car industry. Check out collaborations, Japanese French company together, German US company together, often for strategic reason, to basically in industries, especially where you need lots of research and development. You need to invest a lot in the knowledge, in the in how to improve the technology, where the competition is strong, but also worldwide you don't have 500 car producers. There are some big names and they are not endless. So sometimes it's good to join forces and join knowledge and have so-called synergy effects, that basically you put things together and they have a bigger effect. Because one, in a partnership, it's good that each partner has a competitive edge. So together, you're stronger, basically. And this is often why you have the strategic asset seeking FDI, where it's a partnership where two or more can each bring in something that adds basically to the strength and importance and dominance of this partnership. Yeah. So the knowledge, the technology, the management expertise, being already well established in the market, their assets, and so on. Maybe just being more familiar with the culture can be also very important, so that they can help in the local context to adjust better, being more familiar with the system. So if you want, the main motive here is basically out of strategic reasons to acquire assets that are already there and join forces maybe with other companies in order to access this particular market. So these are the different motives, and as I told you, there is lots of overlaps. I mean, again, institutions matter for all of them. Infrastructure matters for all of them. Eventually, prices and costs and everything matters for all of them. But what is the first motive? And this determines whether you consider the FDI more market-seeking, natural resource-seeking, efficiency-seeking, or strategic asset seeking. Okay, do you have any questions regarding all of that? Then after the break, I'm going to show you a survey asking basically companies, what is the most important for you? And so now we talked a lot theoretically, but what if companies are actually asked, when you decide where you invest worldwide, what is the most important factor for you? Or how important is the one or the other factor? So this would give us more from a practical, empirical perspective, basically a cross-check of what of these factors actually matter more than others. And then we will move on to our discussion on the impact of FDI on development. So let's meet again in 10 minutes. See you then.